The second autumn after Ethan Cole arrived in the little town of Pine Hollow, people stopped calling the Harper farm unlucky. Clara Harper didn't know that day would come. All she knew was that the peach trees produced less fruit every year, and every man she had hired to inspect her irrigation had left with excuses instead of answers. She had almost started believing them. That was the part she hated most. Because deep down, she had known exactly where the problem was. Every spring, she walked the northern boundary the way her late husband Samuel had taught her. Over time, she had learned even more than he had. Near the second drainage marker, the soil stayed wet too long after rain. The ground flattened just enough to trap water instead of guiding it through. That line was designed to serve two purposes. It carried water to the fields during dry weeks and drained excess water after storms. When it failed, the western acreage suffered first. She had dug into it twice herself. Both times she discovered enough to confirm that something beneath had collapsed. But she couldn't repair it alone. She couldn't keep the trench stable, manage the pressure, and replace the damaged section without help. The money needed to hire someone capable had disappeared along with the farm's failing income. So each time she covered the trench back up, returned to the house, and made dinner. Men had come and gone. They listened politely, nodded thoughtfully, blamed weather and misfortune, then rode away. Clara stopped asking for help. What she never stopped doing was knowing the truth. Ethan Cole arrived in Pine Hollow on an April evening because his horse needed water and he needed a hot meal. The saloon still had lights burning long after sunset. He sat quietly at the far end of the counter and ate without drawing attention. Halfway through supper, he overheard a conversation at a round table near the back. 3 men were discussing a widow's farm north of town. They spoke about declining harvests, damaged irrigation, and then casually mentioned what the land would sell for if the owner finally gave up. The exact price per acre rolled off one man's tongue too easily. The others agreed without hesitation. Ethan had spent years fixing water systems across Western territories. He knew the difference between misfortune and manipulation. The next morning, before doing anything else, he rode past the Harper farm. What he saw wasn't ruined land. It was some of the richest soil in the valley slowly being suffocated by neglect. The peach orchard stood on ground capable of thriving if water moved properly. The western fields naturally sloped in a way most farmers wished they had. Everything about the land suggested potential. Except for one broken line. He studied the ground from horseback before finally turning toward the farmhouse. Clara stood near the chicken coop carrying feed. She watched him approach with the caution of someone who had learned that unexpected visitors usually came with a price. A boy appeared behind her on the porch. 13 years old, serious beyond his age. Ethan removed his hat. "My name's Ethan Cole," he said. "I rode past your place this morning. I think I know what's wrong with your water line." Clara folded her arms. The last few men thought they knew too. Below the second drainage marker, Ethan replied calmly. "The grade flattens. The line collapsed beneath it. Your west field suffers because water can't move the way it's supposed to." For several seconds, Clara simply stared. Because he had said exactly what she already knew. "That's where I thought it was," she whispered. "It is. What do you want in return?" "I'll repair it. I can sleep in the barn. Once the work's done, I'll move on." She studied him. Then nodded once. "All right." The boy stepped forward. "I'm Noah." Ethan shook his hand. "You know anything about digging trenches?" "A little." "You'll know more before we're finished." Work began during the first week of May. Every morning before sunrise, Clara placed a cup of coffee near the fence post where Ethan worked. She never said much. Neither did he. When the trench finally opened beneath the second marker, the collapsed section appeared exactly where Clara had predicted. Ethan glanced up. "How long have you known?" Almost 2 years. He simply nodded and continued working. Clara guided him through every detail of that land. She knew how the soil behaved after storms. She knew where frost lingered longest and how drought affected each section differently. Ethan understood water. Clara understood that farm. Together, they repaired what neither could have fixed alone. By the second week, Noah worked beside Ethan every morning. He asked endless questions. Ethan answered every single one honestly. Not simplified versions meant for children. Real explanations. Noah already understood more than most grown men because Clara had taught him well. Ethan respected that without making a show of it. By early summer, clean water flowed through the repaired system. Weeks later, the first major rain arrived. Clara stood at the edge of the western field at sunrise, boots wet from the grass. For the first time in years, water drained exactly as it should. She returned home and cooked breakfast without saying a word. People in town eventually noticed. Especially when the orchard exploded with fruit by early autumn. Branches bent beneath the weight of peaches. Noah climbed ladders laughing the way he had before grief had settled over him. The sound stopped Clara in her tracks. She hadn't heard that laugh in years. At the general store, whispers followed her. "People are talking," Eleanor Briggs said carefully. "A man staying in your barn all these months." Clara placed fabric on the counter. "Samuel hired workers every spring before he got sick," she answered. "That's different." "Why?" "He was your husband." Clara met Eleanor's eyes. "And Ethan's a man doing honest work." She paid for her supplies and left. The whispers continued. But so did the harvest. Ethan worked beside them from sunrise until dark without taking credit for any success. One evening after supper, Clara discovered a dish towel folded neatly on the porch railing. The same one she had wrapped around fresh bread she had quietly delivered to the barn weeks earlier. She picked it up and stared. Then carried it inside. Winter came. Spring returned. The western field produced a full-grain harvest stronger than any in recent memory. That's when people started asking dangerous questions. How had so many experts failed to identify such an obvious problem? The answer finally surfaced. Several men who inspected the Harper farm had recognized exactly what needed fixing. They simply stayed silent. Because they wanted Clara desperate enough to sell cheap. Cheap enough for them to profit later. When old Mr. Bennett from the general store confessed what he knew, Clara felt no shock. Only cold certainty. She had never been foolish. She had simply been surrounded by people willing to wait for her to fail. That evening, Clara found Ethan repairing equipment inside the barn. She repeated everything Mr. Bennett had revealed. Ethan listened quietly. Then said, "I heard those men talking in the saloon my first night here." "You knew?" "I knew what kind of men they were." He lowered his tools. "I just didn't know how far they'd gone." Dinner that night felt different. Noah talked about fence repairs while Clara and Ethan answered him one after another. Simple moments. Ordinary moments. The kind grief had stolen long ago. Another successful harvest arrived. The orchard flourished. The fields thrived. Buyers traveled from neighboring counties hoping to secure fruit before competitors claimed it first. The Harper farm no longer survived. It prospered. One October evening, Clara and Ethan walked through the orchard inspecting root systems. At least that's what they pretended to be doing. Eventually Ethan stopped walking. Clara took 2 more steps before noticing. When she turned around, he stood beneath fading autumn light looking toward the rows of trees. "I came here planning to leave," he said. "But somewhere along the way, this place started feeling like home." He paused. "I care about this land." His eyes lifted to hers. "And I care about you." Clara's breath caught. Ethan reached into his coat. Instead of producing a ring, he unfolded an old photograph. It showed a younger version of himself beside people long gone. I spent years drifting from one place to another because losing them convinced me not to belong anywhere again. His voice remained steady. But Noah deserves someone who stays. And maybe. He hesitated. So do you. Clara looked away toward the orchard. Toward everything they'd rebuilt together. You already stayed, she whispered. You never left. Ethan lowered the photograph. Neither moved. No dramatic promises. No grand speeches. Just truth standing quietly between them. Finally, Clara stepped closer. If you're asking whether you should keep sleeping in the barn, she said softly, the answer's no. A small smile touched Ethan's face. No. The house has an empty room. It wasn't a proposal. It meant more. Because trust came before forever. And both of them understood the difference. Seasons passed. Noah grew taller. The orchard expanded. The grain harvest continued breaking records. People from neighboring towns admired the Harper farm as an example of perseverance. The same people who once called it cursed now called it remarkable. The men who had waited for Clara's failure avoided her eyes whenever they passed through Pine Hollow. Noah noticed. He understood enough not to ask. One late summer morning, Clara handed Noah a cloth-wrapped loaf destined for Mr. Bennett's store. It was the fine linen she once saved for special occasions. Now she used it without hesitation. Noah accepted it, then studied his mother. You know, he said, most people already think Ethan's family. Clara pretended to straighten the bread. Do they? I do. He adjusted his hat. You don't have to be afraid of being happy. Then he headed down the road. Clara stood motionless long after he disappeared from sight. Behind the house came the familiar sound of Ethan working the hand pump. Steady. Reliable. Water rising from deep underground. She followed the sound and found him repairing tools beneath the shade tree. Noah said something interesting this morning, she began. Ethan glanced up. Should I be worried? He said you became family a long time ago. Silence settled between them. Then Clara reached into her apron pocket. Inside rested a plain silver band that had belonged to her grandmother. She placed it in Ethan's hand. You asked for nothing when you arrived here, she said. You repaired what everyone else ignored. You taught my son. You stayed when leaving would have been easier. Her voice trembled slightly. So this time, I'm asking. Ethan stared at the ring. Clara managed a small smile. Would you like to spend the rest of your life exactly where you already belong? For once, Ethan Cole had no immediate answer. Emotion finally caught him off guard. After a moment, he nodded. More than anything. They married the following spring beneath blooming peach trees. Noah stood beside Ethan with polished boots and proud eyes. Mr. Bennett gave a toast. The orchard flourished. The fields prospered. And years later, when people asked how the Harper farm had survived after everyone believed it doomed, Noah always answered the same way. It survived because my mother never stopped seeing the truth. And because one traveler passing through chose to help instead of looking away. Some people save land. Some people save families. And sometimes, without realizing it, they save both at once.